Hello, everybody. Welcome. Thank you for joining us again for this breakout session. I have the pleasure of introducing a man who needs no introduction, but I have but one job today, and I'm going to do it anyway. Tom Doyle has worked to expose clergy sexual abuse in the Catholic Church since 1984. He's testified as an expert witness and written and lectured on the subject repeatedly. Ordained in 1970, Tom worked as a parish priest, church administrator, and a teacher, spent 19 years as a United States Air Force chaplain. Tom holds a doctorate in canon law and a master's degree in philosophy, theology, church administration, canon law, and political science. Tom, take it away.
Thank you. That was nice and short, not as short as I'd like. I've heard some of these introductions of me, and they sound like a eulogy at a Baptist wake. And so I appreciate the brevity. As he said, my name is Tom Doyle. I've been involved in this issue since 1984. And for those who don't know, I got involved in it because at the time, I was deeply, deeply embedded on the inside. I worked in the Vatican Embassy in Washington, D.C. for the Vatican Diplomatic Service. I was a loyal, obedient, card-carrying Orthodox cleric. Wore red French cuffs, Roman collar, the whole 9 yards, everything. And that's when I became involved, simply because I happened to be there. My boss, who was the papal nuncio, who was an archbishop, gave me a letter that we received from the Diocese of Lafayette, Louisiana. And that's how it all started. He said, just follow this, keep an eye on this, make a file, prepare correspondence for me to sign, and so on. And it was about Gilbert Gote. Several families had come forward, and that's how it all started. And the other thing that made, I want to say this clearly, I've had people, or heard people, over the past number of years say things like on television, people who are observers of one sort or commentators, thinking that this whole nightmare started in 2002 with the Boston revelations. And I say to myself, were you guys asleep between 1984 and 2002? Because it didn't. There was a lot of stuff going on between 84 and 2002. Anyway, that's how I became involved, and I've been involved steadily since that time, and I still am. And at the rate things are going now, I probably will continue to be involved for the rest of my breathing days, as long as I have my marbles and can think straight. So with all that being said, I want to talk today. I said that we're going to have a conversation. I want to mention some things about the present state of affairs. And as I said, I continue to be involved. I do a lot of work as an expert witness, as a consultant, both for attorneys in court cases and also for individual survivors, not just in the United States, but in several other countries as well. I right now am working with the New Zealand Royal Commission as an expert witness. I testified already, and I continue to be involved with them. So, and I also, I guess my primary interest, apart from helping the survivors find justice and peace, inner peace, my other interest is the history of this issue. I have been very much involved in researching the history of sexual abuse, sexual violation in the Catholic Church for 20-some years, because I'm looking, as many are, for the bottom line answers. Why has this nightmare taken place? Where is it going? And I was fortunate to have some colleagues who were equally interested in that. One is Richard Sipe, who became my closest friend. And in fact, I said last night in the thing that the last thing Richard said to me the night before he passed into eternity was, Tom, do not stop asking why. And I remember I said to him, Richard, you're going to know the answer long before I do. And he just kind of smiled and closed his eyes. And The other individual is a man named Patrick Wall, who many of you know, he's an incredible researcher. We've been talking, along with Mary Ann Sipe, Richard's wife, for a long time about the fundamental history. There's been a lot of research done, a lot of questions asked, a lot of work done on why this issue has happened. But nothing has been done that has really probed to the bottom of it all and really looked deeply into some of the historic reasons. So that's where I'm going to get to a little bit today. I'm very much influenced by some incredible research that was done by a woman, a medievalist named Diane Elliott, and she wrote a book called The Corrupter of Boys. Here it is, sports fans, if you can see it. Buy it if you have the money, because it is well worth it. It's one of the best, the only study that I've ever seen that has been done, thoroughly done, of this issue from the very earliest years of the Catholic Church. And I mean the earliest. And Dick and Patrick and I wrote a book, as many of you know, Sex, Priests, and Secret Codes, which is the paper trail, the legal history, the attempts to eliminate or shut down or control sexual abuse through legislation. This book is even much more, it's much better. It fills in a lot of blanks. I'll get into that in a minute. So I want to start, my title for this talk is also the title of what I hope to be either a monograph or a book someday before I'm senile. And the title is going to be The Long Black Line That Just Keeps Getting Longer. And this black line starts in the first century of the existence of what we now call the Catholic Church. And the line is still in existence, and it's still getting longer. One of the things we have seen recently in the past, say, 2.5 years, has been a surge of lawsuits. And that has happened because the statutes of limitations have changed. And they have changed not because the lawmakers in several states have woken up and smelt the coffee. No, they've changed because we, the survivors and our supporters, have made it happen. The constant pressure, dialoguing, working with legislators, both publicly and privately, that is what has made this happen. And that's caused a massive surge, especially in the East Coast. We are getting somewhere. I've been in this for 34 years, or 37 years. And as I said, I never had the vaguest idea when I started where it was going to go. I meet a lot of people constantly who get discouraged. I no longer get discouraged because I've become very cynical and realistic. But I do know that we are making progress. And the survivors and their support groups, primarily SNAP and ECA and clergy abuse, that is basically, it's around the United States, but it has done incredible work in Europe and Latin America and sub-Saharan Africa, where there are other support groups for survivors in some of these other countries. The difference is that the victims and their supporters are changing the way the institutional church has acted and how it wants people to view it. We have changed the way that the institution, by institutional church, I'm talking about the governmental structure, not the people of God, which is the 1 billion, 15 million people that constitute the Catholic Church. But I'm talking about the governmental structure. And the governmental structure of the Catholic Church is run by approximately 300 or 3,000 bishops. If you count diocesan bishops, the guys that are in different positions of authority, 3,000 are in running a monarchical organization. And of these 3,000, 100% of them are celibate males who have never been involved in an intimate relationship, at least a healthy one, and none of whom have ever had children or raised children or been intimately involved with children. And that makes a mammoth difference in one's life. Anybody who's a parent can vouch for that. So we're getting somewhere. The leaders and the followers are now more united in purpose and tactics than the hierarchy is. And as I said, we are making progress. The protective shield, this is very important, the protective shield about the bishops, the beliefs, the protective shield of beliefs, toxic beliefs, inaccurate beliefs about bishops, priests, and the church, and the element of unquestioned deference has seriously, seriously eroded. And that has protected the ecclesiastical system, where we all, we're so used to saying, yes, sir, no, sir, whatever you say, sir, or father, or bishop. Those days are gone. Those days are gone. And a lot of people now, from at least our community, when they're discussing this with a big shot from the church, it's on a level playing field. They look them in the eye and they say, you and I are equal. And there's nothing scarier to a Catholic bishop than an adult Catholic, a real adult Catholic, who thinks here and here like an adult and doesn't turn into a 4-year-old when he walks into the church. So the pronouncements of the leadership, the hierarchs, the bishops, are listened to much, much more critically when they're listened to. And this differs, of course, with country and culture. Now, at this stage, I want to just single out 3 people. There are many, many, but I just want to mention 3 who have been very tireless, totally devoted, and above all, very successful in getting us to where we are today. The first one is David Clossy, who was with SNAP since the beginning. Bob Holtzen, who many of you know, who I don't know where he gets his energy, but he's got it, and he's indefatigable, and he does incredible things for victims, for the cause, for individuals. And the last one I want to mention is Becky Ayani. I've known Becky since the beginning of this millennium, and I've seen a lot of the wonderful things she has done and continues to do, again, tirelessly. And I also know some of her own story and what she had to put up with and the way she was treated by the Sanhedrin of the Diocese of Arlington, where I live myself. Now, the other thing I want to talk about is Pope Francis, not in depth. He's done a lot to combat the evil that exists in the hierarchy. He's done more than any other pope in history, and he's done more than any other pope to do something about the biggest problem the church has, which is sexual abuse, sexual violation of human beings, mostly minors. He and actually Benedict did this too, but he's fired bishops. He defrocked Cardinal McCarrick, and the last cardinal who was totally defrocked was Cesare Borgia. That's a long time ago. He's apologized for his mistakes. He's actually talked and listened to survivors, actually sat down and listened for long periods of time. He fired 3 cardinals. He's fired a lot of other bishops, but he's one man, and he's up against a formidable force, and that's the Vatican Curia, the diehards and the worldwide episcopacy that does not want things to change. Because the institutional church, as we know it, has provided and continues to provide these men with their identity, their history, their present, and their future. And if you see all that threatened, it's pretty scary, and especially when it's threatened by the source that is providing the threat now. So I think the Pope is doing something. Now, the buzzword now is synodality. I have no idea what that means. I have no idea. I've got a graduate degree in theology, but this stuff changes, and I don't know what that means. It's another buzzword. But it's one of a long line of buzzwords. And will it really change anything? I don't think so. I think that one of the difficulties we've had to face has been the fact that we've dealt with an institutional church that is cooked up, endless pronouncements, apologies, explanations, programs, policies, decrees, documents, etc. What the survivors want, what I want, and our supporters want is no more words, no more papers. We want action that we can see and that's going to last, real action. But the fact is that basically when you've got 4,000 plus bishops around the world a lot of them stay under the radar and they do basically what they want to do. Pope Benedict said several times bishops were supposed to take care of the victims, be pastorally kind to them, and so on. How many actually did that? He just said it, but he never backed it up by bouncing a few of them. That would have helped a lot. But I think looking back over all my years and the conversations I've had with so many people who've been involved in this, of all kinds, professors, analyzers, whatever you want to call it. Basically, the episcopacy has not changed at the core. At the very core, it hasn't changed. They still don't get it. This issue that we're dealing with, they don't see it the way it really is and the way we see it. They still see themselves as an elite, and they try to protect their social structure, which is an elite social structure. They still believe that they can win at everything they get involved in, and they still keep saying stupid things. That's a fact. And we have to remember, though, that there are individual bishops who do understand and do the right thing and want to do the right thing, but they're not the entire corporation. And these men do not rise to the level of high-level management and authority in their various and sundry bishops' associations. Every bishop that stood up and publicly supported victims of sexual abuse has, in some way or other, been penalized. Tom Gumbleton, 3 weeks after he testified in Ohio, the Vatican sent a letter over and they basically said they fired him as auxiliary bishop of Detroit and took him away from his parish where he'd been for 25 years. And as Tom said to me, he said, they showed me the letter and it said they fired me because I broke communio with my brother bishops. And I said, thank God you did. You opted for Christ rather than the code of canon law. But self-interests and power are the two main things that are at stake. That's the fundamental premise of church government, namely the power of individuals. The power of individuals, not the power of groups. There are no consultative groups in the basic structure of the Catholic Church. A lot of religious orders have. They have a whole different system. But in the Catholic Church, the only collegiate body or group that really does anything, has any power, is the College of Cardinals. And that's only once when they elect a pope, if they only elect one once. Like a couple times they've done more. So the institutional Catholic Church in the United States has experienced, as we all know, a period of steady deterioration of credibility, a drainage of funds, and a loss of membership. The key aggravating factor in this has been the reality of clergy sexual abuse, clergy sexual violation of innocent, vulnerable people. In time, what had surfaced in the United States was not unique to the United States, as Pope John Paul II tried to say. This is an American problem, you solve it. And those of us who knew anything about it said, oh no, Jack, it's not. And pretty soon they found out the painful way that it is a universal problem. And the only place that this does not exist is where there is no evidence of the Roman Catholic Church. So that boils it down to maybe two countries, Antarctica and the Kingdom of Bhutan. Every place else seems to have some sort of a hierarchy. And if we look at the statistics, the reality is that this is not a religious problem. It's not a social problem. It's a psychological issue. Men who violate children, doesn't matter what country they're in or what language they speak. It's something that's in them. So it's a problem that's broader than ecclesiastical boundaries. But the survivors have done what no individual or group has been able to do in the Catholic Church for nearly 2,000 years, or for the entire scope of its existence. They have done this. They have made the churches, not just our church, but a Catholic Church, but other denominations, Christian and otherwise, they've made them realize that the sexual violation of young people, any people, is evil, it's intrinsically wrong, it's profoundly harmful, and it must stop. We have done that. What's happened in other religions, in other societies, in other private organizations started because the people in the United States, the survivors in the United States, you stood up and said, enough. We're not putting up with this. We're going to fight back. And I've often looked at this as somebody getting in a bulldozer, starting it up, and trying to move Mount Everest with that bulldozer. Well, we're in the bulldozer. We've kept feeding it diesel fuel to keep it moving, and we're moving that mountain. Slow but sure, we're moving that mountain. I want to say a couple of things about lawyers, because one of the problems I've had with a lot of the, I guess, academic seminars that they've had, they're now trendy to have Catholic universities and colleges. It's politically correct to have something about the clergy abuse issue. And so we are going to solve all the problems and give you all the answers. But they do not include the survivors' attorneys. And these men and women know a lot about this issue, believe me. On that score, just as not so much an aside, but a true fact, my brother Richard Syke once said that the attorneys who worked for the Catholic bishops were the single most morally deficient group he had ever encountered in his life. And he was right. They do the bishop's dirty work and they make a lot of money at it. And they accuse, the defenders of the church accuse the victims, the survivors, and their bishops of being money hungry. No, wait a minute, flip it around. The attorneys that represent our survivors do so on a contingency basis. And some of them have had to mortgage their homes, their businesses, and everything else to continue doing what they're doing. And if they don't score, nothing comes in. Those who work for the institutional church, however, get paid by the hour, no matter what happens. And between 2004 and 2019, the Catholic bishops, not the religious orders, I don't know if I have any numbers on them, but the Catholic bishops in the US have spent at least, and this is a conservative number, at least $643,968,347. That's over $500 million on law fees. Where does the money come from? It comes from the people in the pews who still give it. That's not the total. That's only 2004 to 2019. We don't know how much was spent between 1984 and 2004 because there aren't any statistics. The numbers started coming in after the Dallas Charter when they had a number of mechanisms which would produce some of these costs for the public to know. Last year's topic that I spoke on was this: will it ever end? My answer this year is no, it won't end. Why? Because it's not just in the system, it is the system that is making this reality continue as a reality. We've looked at the first two levels, let's say, of the reality of sexual violation in the Roman Catholic Church. The first level is what's actually happening, the level today of people being violated, victims coming forward, things happening in the support groups and the media and so on. That's level number one. Level number two would be looking at the institutional church and at the actual actions of the bishops and what they do and what they have done. I want to dig into, and I have been digging into, the deeper levels that go far, far deeper, that answer some of these questions. Why does this happen? Several prominent Catholic theologians have spoken and written eloquently about what many call a crisis in the Catholic Church. And it's not a crisis. Crisis is something that is limited by time. This is not a crisis. It's part of the very fiber of the institution. and it's directly related to certain essential elements of this institution. And the main focus at most of the academic gatherings that I have either known about or heard about, I've only been invited to a couple of them. The main focus at most of these gatherings over the past 30 years has been figuring out how to heal the church while still keeping some of the essential elements of the structure. Now, church, I mean the institution. That's what they're looking at, how to heal the structures that we have. And that's fine, but it's secondary in importance. And you know what's primary in importance? Healing the real church. The real church is the human beings who have been deeply violated, their families, the countless people whose entire belief systems have been shaken to the core. And you're looking at one of them right here. The people are the church. We are the people of God. Whether we go to Mass on Sunday, whether we worship in the field, whether we ever think about it or not, we are the people of God. We are not the people of the Code of Canon Law. We are not the people of the tabernacle. We are the people of the higher power. Whatever you want to call that higher power, however you want to envision them, it's your business. But that's who we are. And that higher power, I think, at least in my belief system, is non-judgmental and is so mysterious that we can't put our finger on what, how, and who. The people, as I said, are the church. They're the institutional government, the structure, the hierarchy, and the 3,000 or so clerics that run it are not the church. They're the institutional governmental system. That's like the general staff of the United States Air Force, the general staff at Air Staff Headquarters of the Pentagon. That's not the Air Force. And if those guys all disappeared, I can say this, I was in the Air Force would keep moving. They keep doing their job, and they'd be doing it well. They find other people to take the place and figure things out and give the orders. Some have said that sexual violation in the institutional Catholic Church is no different than it is in other institutions. Well, that's wrong. It is different, it's very different. The institutional church and its culture are made up of certain elements that enable sexual violation and the protection of the violators. That's not just something that's accidental. That's deeply embedded in the system. The violators are protected by the system, by a stronger, worldwide, bigger system than the protectors of any other institution. And no other church and no other institution holds its people and its clergy to as high a standard of moral and sexual behavior as the Catholic Church. And herein, the hypocrisy is blatant. You know, the hierarchs are obsessed with sex. They want to control everybody's sex life. But what have they done about the clergy and themselves who have violated sexually so many people? Nothing but except what they were forced to do. We would not be where we are today with all of this had the institutional church not been brought into the one forum it cannot control, and that is the forum of civil law in the United States, in Ireland, in the UK, in Canada, and now in continental countries, in Australia and New Zealand. Those are the areas where the rubber hits the road. I've worked in that arena for 30 years. I can tell you that's where we have found out what's really been happening, and that's where the force has come initially to make sure things happen, because all of the protocols and everything else the institution has cooked up, all these safeguards for children, that's all been forced. That, you know, if none of the court stuff had ever happened, we'd be today where we were in 1944 with sexual abuse. All of that has been forced. It did not come because somewhere in the hierarchy from the top on down had a light bulb go on and say, hey, this business with the kids is really bad stuff. We got to do something about it. And we got to look into ourselves. That's never happened. We need to know where this evil is what it is, fits into church history. I'm going to go through this quickly. I'm going to give you three things that have been said. One is Edmund Burke, who was a statesman. And he said, those who don't know history are destined to repeat it. And then George Santayana, who was an author, said the same thing. Those who cannot remember the past are bound to repeat it. And then this I just picked up the other day from the editor of what I consider to be a really good Catholic publication, because it's objective. It's called Le Croix. It comes out in English and French. And he said the trauma caused by the residential school scandal in Canada will haunt Canadian society for a long time. Overcoming it requires the patient work of memory and dialogue. That is the exact opposite of what's being promoted by the supporters of the so-called cancel culture, a culture of erasure and forgetting. Such matters are too serious to be settled with a tweet or the strike of a match. When we claim to reconcile cultures, the last thing we should do is give in to emotion or naivete. What we're trying to do with our issue, this is part of our deal, what's happened in the residential schools in Canada, because most of them were run by elements of the Roman Catholic Church. And it's a huge scandal out there. There's always been a sharp difference in our denomination between what has been preached and what has actually happened, what's been going on, between preaching and doing on the part of the leadership. Another big problem is that secrecy and revisionist history have helped save the institution's image, its power, and its credibility. And the institutional church's own theology and the way Catholics have been taught has created a selective awareness of church history. You know, we were taught, as those of us who, I went to Catholic school, not for a long time, but a couple of years, but I still remember, you know, the Crusades were looked upon as a heroic gesture to win back the Holy Land from the Muslims. Well, the Crusades were a nightmare. The Inquisition, there's no excuse for the Inquisition, yet in our lifetime, as recently as I think 10 years ago, Cardinal Sodano, who used to be the Papal Secretary of State, and who's the guy that engineered the major cover-up for the Legionaries of Christ, and Father Maciel, Cardinal Sodano was asked to speak at a centenary, the 400th anniversary of the execution of Father Giordano Bruno, who was a Dominican. And he was burned to death in Florence, in the city, in one of the squares. So this is what Sodano said. That's what he said about the Inquisition. He said, historical records show that the inquisitors had, in fact, had the desire to preserve freedom and to promote the common good, and did everything possible to save life. I mean, you know, that's like saying that rattlesnakes really only want to eat salad. They don't want to bite you. That's when I read that the first time, I said, this is too much. Then we have all the Crusades, the Inquisition. The other big issue is the papal silence on the Holocaust. You may not know this, but you know, there's been a lot of talk about Pius XII and the fact that he didn't do anything public to save the Jewish people, which is true. He didn't make any pronouncements. He could have. He made pronouncements about everything else. And we used to refer to him in the seminary, when I was in the seminary, as the fourth person in the Blessed Trinity, because he knew the unknowable. There was a guy named Joseph Tiso, who was a Roman Catholic priest, a Monsignor. He was the president of the Slovak Republic from 1939 to 1945, which was a client state of Nazi Germany. The church never did a thing about it. He was never excommunicated. He was never advised to stand down. He was never told to quit. And he was collaborating with the Nazis. Well, in the end, the church didn't do anything, but the Slovak people did. And he was charged and tried for treason, and he was hanged in, I think it was 1946. The rat lines, which was a system of getting high-level and mid-level Nazi officers into Latin America or South America was run through the Vatican, getting false Vatican passports, baptismal certificates, that kind of thing. And then there was another big issue that has been glossed over, and that's the collaboration of the Croatian church with the Nazis. I won't go into that in depth, but it's true. So history the history of the various violations of clerical celibacy and monastic chastity has never been objectively researched and published, never. And it is a very long, complicated, and rich in the sense that there's a lot of it, history. The sexual violation of young adolescent boys, and these were the primary targets of sexual predators among the clergy. The primary targets were young adolescent boys. It's never been researched, nor has the real evil underlying it ever been really acknowledged. There's no historical evidence of any efforts to expose and comprehend the complex nature of the sexual violation of the young that has existed in the history of Roman Catholicism since the first century. And the predominant response has been secrecy. We'll keep it covered up. Secrecy, denial, whatever. And the Catholic institutions of higher learning that have had seminars, Georgetown, Fordham, Villanova, Catholic University of America, just to name a few, they've had seminars and they've resisted, I think, or ignored the problem. Well, they didn't ignore the problem until the past decade. You never heard a peep out of any one of these outfits. But it became trendy and it became safe and it became fashionable to talk about it. And I think that's all tied together with the Boston revelations in 2002, the upsurge in lawsuits, the investigations of various state dioceses by state authorities, Pennsylvania being the leader. I've looked at most of these events, and I've looked at the people whom they've had speaking, and some of the people they're good. They have a realistic knowledge and experience with the issue, but for the most part, the end results of a lot of these seminars have been non-consequential. They haven't made a difference in much of anything. None of them seemed able to separate the issue of violation of children by clergy. None of them have been able to separate that issue from one or the other degree of support for the institutional church. Most of them have been predominantly looking at how we can heal the institutional church, not about how we can heal or save or help the countless victims. They are the church. So forget about the structures and all the rules and regulations and who's sitting on what board and all this rigmarole. That's not that important. It's action, somebody that can make the decision to do something about this. So the endless theologizing and the impassioned pleas for a return to official church teaching and rules on chastity and other sexual issues, these are also part of some of those who think they have the answers to this issue. You got to go back to the observation of chastity, priest observing celibacy, and so on. These are not only useless, but counterproductive. And I hate to say it, but they are. The reports from Pennsylvania, the other grand juries, state-ordered investigations have confirmed what I have thought and what has been confirmed by some other historical scholars, and that's this. What we have been witnessing in the contemporary church is no aberration to the 20th century, but it's a continuation of practices that have spanned the centuries of the existence of the church. And that's where we find the answers, digging as deep as we can. I spoke at a canon law convention in 1986 in Morristown, New Jersey, along with Ray Mouton. And at the convention, there was a press conference, and I said, this was the greatest crisis the church has faced in centuries. And I look back on that statement, and that was 2 years after I became aware of it all. And it was not then and is not now a crisis. It is not the biggest problem to face in centuries because it's part of the system itself. The system is the problem. So it's not a separate problem, a separate issue. And it's a line, as I said, it's a long black line that will continue until the foundational elements of the church are seen primarily as an institution, and as the church is seen as an institution and a culture. It will change when they have brought into existence and supported, and the existence of this institution as we've known it disappears. When these elements that have supported the victims, abusers, the perpetrators, and have supported the secrecy, when the elements, the bottom line, is gone, then the problem will begin to heal itself. And people ask me a lot, when's this going to be over? My response is it's not going to be over until the system that it is part of is over and changes radically. The institutional church, meaning the hierarchical structures, have not prioritized the search for answers. Why? Because of the fear of losing power. Not losing souls, but losing power. From the 3rd century to the present, there has been a steady rising of the prestige and therefore the power of the clergy. This is one of the key elements. I'm going to mention the key elements of this issue. And I'm looking at my time. It's 15:11. What time are we supposed to stop? 3:30? Okay, I'm gonna capsulize this a little bit. The understanding of who priests are, what the priesthood is a key issue. And priests began to create a different identity for themselves, even in the 3rd century. Now, a lot of these guys couldn't read and write. They could go through the ceremonies, but they couldn't read and write. They had no education. But they were creating a persona that said, we're holier than you are. We're more powerful than you are. And as the sacramental system developed and became much more complicated going into the Middle Ages, and it was seen as you have to have the sacramental system to reach salvation. And the guys who control the sacramental system are the priests and the bishops. Sure, their power is again elevated. The concept of clerical privilege in civil society and in the ecclesiastical society in the church, that has gradually increased over the years because we're clerics, we have privileges, we're special. We have to be treated in a special way. There's also been a constant preoccupation with sex by the Catholic Church, and it's been unreal, an unrealistic preoccupation. There have been continued attempts by popes throughout history to totally control the expressions of human sexuality. And if you look at the writings of Pope John Paul II, you can see that very blatantly right there. But there's been a constant dichotomy between what was preached and what was done. You can't preach and tell everybody to be, totally chaste and totally this and totally that, and look only to the Lord in heaven. And at the same time, allow and make possible and enable your own troops from violating vulnerable people. It doesn't work that way. There's another reason. This is reason number 2. First is the unrealistic concept of who priests are. And I want to add in there a little something. Those of us who have been around the clerical world a little bit have heard the term ontological change. When a man is ordained a priest, he is ontologically changed. Now, that comes from the Greek word ontos, which means being. And it means your being is changed. Now, I remember having lunch one day with Bishop Jeff Robinson, God rest his soul, who was one of my heroes. And I said, Jeff, what does that mean? And he said, he's from Australia, was from Australia. He said, Tom, it's nothing more than ecclesiastical gibberish. And it is. So I tried to figure out, where did this come from? Is this something that came from the apostolic age? Is it in the scriptures? No. It came from that concept of the ontological change. It came from a kind of an attempt to redefine the nature of the priesthood in 17th century French spirituality. And I read a book on that, a wonderful book called Berul's Spiritual Theology of the Priesthood. You're looking at it backwards here. The most difficult book I've ever read. I mean, it's really a tough one. But I read it and it helped me understand where these crazy ideas about ontological change have come from, where when you're ordained, you become part of Jesus Christ. And the focus isn't on what you do, it's on who you are. That's magical thinking. And because of who you are, you're very special. You are entitled to walk on water and to walk on this pink cloud above the sidewalks and the roads. And that had a lot to do with enabling the clergy to seduce kids. Another big issue is the pejorative attitude toward children. This has been in existence in Western civilization since Roman times, if not before. But the Catholic Church, as I'm going to call it that, was profoundly influenced by both Greek culture and Roman culture when it came into existence. And it came into existence as just a following of Jesus, people meeting in homes. But their concepts, their ideas, they weren't totally brainwashed when they joined the church. I mean, they still brought their culture with them. So the children in the pre-medieval world, by pre-medieval, I'm talking about, let's say, 1st century to 5th or 6th, they had little value in themselves. This was especially true of the primitive church, which was heavily influenced by Greek and Roman cultures. The Christian emperors who came into the world in the play of history, let's say in the 3rd, 4th century, Justinian, Theodosius, they took a much harsher stance on this violation of kids than the church did. I see my man looking at me, so I'm going to keep going here.
Hey, Tom, I hate to break in, but we are over time and the room is about to close on us. So
okay.
I just want to say thank you for sharing all of your information with us. Folks, there are some great questions in the chat. I will try to communicate with Tom on my own and get some answers to those great questions for you. And we'll see you in just a couple of minutes in the next session. Thank you, Tom.
You're welcome. Thank you. Sorry I couldn't finish, but I've only got 20 pages of my outline left to go.
Well, we will all be looking forward to seeing the book come out, and I'm sure we'll all be in line for that. So
thank you.
Thank you so much, Tom.
Thank you very much.